Hilchos Tzitzis Perek Shlishi. The laws of Tzitzis, chapter 3. It's the final chapter of these halachot. One of the shortest sets of all of the halachot in Rambam. The shortest is always 3 chapters. There's never anything shorter than 3. And today we're going to talk about which types of clothing are obligated in Tzitzis. Till now we talked about how to make the actual strings, the white strings, the blue strings. Today we're on to the clothes. And it's interesting to point out 2 things. Number 1, there's no obligation on clothes to have tzitzit. If you have a garment, a talit, sitting in your drawer, there's no problem. You don't have to put on tzitzit. There's also no obligation for you to wear tzitzit. There's no mitzvah that says you have to put on a 4-cornered garment and wear tzitzit. The mitzvah is, if you wear a 4-cornered garment, then you have to put on tzitzit. Understand? So that's number 1. Number 2 is, if you look on the screen, you see the pasuk, one of the 2 psukim in the Torah where we're commanded about tzitzit. This is in Parashat Ki Tetzei in Chumash Dvarim, and it says, Gedilim ta'aselach al arba kanfot ksutcha asher techaseba. See that over there? Gedilim means woven strings, spun strings. You should make for yourself on the 4 corners of your garment, which you use to cover yourself with. So we're going to see that each of those highlighted words is important. Arba kanfot, it has to be 4 corners. Ksutcha, it has to be your clothing. Asher techaseba, that you use to cover, that tells us how big clothing has to be. It has to be big enough to cover us. That's one pasuk, and then the other pasuk is this one in the Shema from Parashat Shlach. We're much more familiar with this one, where it says, Daber al bnei Yisrael v'amarta alehem v'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem. You have to make tzitzit in the corners of your garment. That's the other verse. So we're going to see throughout this chapter that both verses are going to become important. It says the Rambam halacha aleph, ksut shechayav adam la'asot bat tzitzit min Torah. The clothing which a person is obligated to make tzitzit from the Torah. And again, he doesning have to make tzitzit. If it's sitting in your drawer, you're not planning to wear it, you don't have to do it. But it's talking about when he plans to wear it. Therefore, he has to make tzitzit. Is which clothing? Hiksut sheyeshla arba knafayim. It has to be clothing that has 4 corners exactly. It's a square cloak or rectangular. O yoter al arba, or more than 4. More than 4 points in the clothing where they meet as a corner. V'tiyeh midata. There's also a minimum size. The size of the clothing has to be kadesh yitkaseba rosho v'rubo shel katan. It has to be big enough to cover the head and most of the body of a child hamithalech levado bashuk, who is old enough to walk on his own in the market. The Torah says is about 9 years old. Ve'inot tzarich acher l'shamro v'lelech imo, and he doesn't require anybody else to guard him and walk with him. So you take this child, about 9-year-old child, you put a piece of clothing around his head and most of his body. That's how big your clothing has to be obligated in tzitzit. The practical halacha on this is it has to be 1 amma by 1 amma. 18 by 18 inches, or according to the Chazon Ish, 24 by 24 inches, but pretty small when you think about it. It's already mechuyav in tzitzit. V'tiyeh haksut shel tzemer o shel pishtan bilvad. The Rambam holds very fascinatingly that min haTorah, the only tzitzis that are obligated in Torah law is wool or linen clothing. If your clothing is cotton, if your clothing is polyester, you don't have to put on tzitzit. We'll see in a second. Halacha bet. Aval, says the Rambam, talit shel sha'ar minin. If you had a talis of another type of material, you could go in bigdei meshi, like silk, or bigdei tzemer gefen, or clothes of cotton, or bigdei tzemer gemalim, or camel's wool, the tzemer arnavim, or hare, rabbit's wool, the notzah shel izim, or goat skin feathers, wool, the chayotzei bahen, or anything like it. En chayavin b'mitzvat tzitzit, ela midivrei chachamim. Rambam's opinion. They're not obligated in tzitzis at all. Only the sages told us, it's rabbinic. Kedeli hizaher b'mitzvat tzitzit. Only to be careful in the mitzvah of tzitzit. We don't want you to forget. We don't want you to think, only this clothes, that clothes. So you say all clothes are chayav, but only midrabanan, only rabbinically. V'hu, and even then it has to be, again, meeting those criteria, shetiyeh merubat o yoter al arba. It has to be rectangular or with more than 4 corners. V'yesh shiura kashiur she'amarnu. And the amount will be like the amount that we said, big enough to wrap a 9-year-old's head and most of his body. Shekol habgadim ha'amurim b'torah stam. Because whenever you have in the Torah the word bigdehem, beged, like over here in Batzitzit, we say al kanfei vigdehem. When Torah uses the word beged, what does it mean? Stam, if it's by default, einam elat tzemer upishtim bilvad, that only refers to wool and linen. This is the Rambam's psak. V'kacha kol ha'poskim ha'sfaradim. All the Sephardi authorities, the Shulchan Aruch, they all rule. Ein tzitzit ela mitzemer upishtim. You only have wool and linen clothing are obligated to. Now the Ashkenazim, the Ramah, and all the Rabbeinu Asher, they say no. Tzitzit min Torah is for every type of clothing. Wool clothing, linen clothing, even cotton. That's why today you see many people wear cotton tzitzit. That's if you're Ashkenaz. Really, if you're a Sephardi, you should wear only wool tzitzit. But nevertheless, it's become common practice today that many people wear cotton and polyester tzitzit. Why? Because they say that the Shulchan Aruch is only talking about the talit gadol, the big talis. That has to be wool or linen. But if I'm wearing a talit katan, then I can wear any material that I want. That's the common practice. The Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch says that Yirei Shamayim should wear even talit katan out of wool for Yirei Shamayim. But the big talit, for sure. If you like the Sefardim, you should wear a wool talit, which I think is what everyone does today. Today, all the talitot shel Shacharis is all wool, right? Makes sense. Halacha Gimel. Let's go back to this pasuk over here. The verse says, Al arba kanfot ksutcha. You put tzitzis on the four corners of your garment. Ba'alat arba, v'lo ba'alat shalosh. Since it says four, that tells us that only if the clothing is four-cornered, but if the clothing is only three-cornered, you don't have to put on tzitzit. That's why you'll see many Chabad people who wear a kapata on Shabbat, the long coat. So in the front there's two corners, and in the back there's also an open slit, which would mean four corners. So if you look at every Chabad guy, in the back corner it's rounded off. One of them is agol. So now it's patur mitzitzit, because three corners doesn't have to have tzitzit. But technically if you have a tuxedo and it meets like with four corners, you have to check, you have to be very careful that it shouldn't be obligated in tzitzit.
What about the suit? I mean, some suits have the slit in the back too.
But they're not square. See over here, they're round. So it's got to be four corners meeting. Im Kain, says the Rambam, if you're being so exact about the word four, you're saying four, not three, maybe four, not five. Ba'alat arba v'lo ba'alat chamesh. Maybe it means four-cornered, not five-cornered. Talmud lomar, therefore the next verse, the next word is asher techaseba, that you use to cover yourself. Afilu ba'alat chamesh or yotar al zeh. Those extra words teach us even a five-cornered garment or more. Now, who said to go that way? Why am I using the extra words to include a five-cornered garment, and I'm using the number four to exclude three-cornered garment? Maybe go the other way. Maybe four means not five, and the inclusionary words includes three corners. At the end of the day, both of them don't have four corners. Says the Rambam, it's better to obligate a five-cornered garment because five already has four inside it, so it's already included. And the three doesn't even have four. Lefichach, therefore, says the Rambam, kishuhu oseb tzitzit lebalat chamesh or shesh, if you do make tzitzit for a garment with five corners or six, eino oseh ela le'arba knafayim hameruchakot zu mizu meotan hachamesh or hashesh bilvad. Choose the four furthest corners on the five or the six and put them on the four corners. Shene'emar, because at the end of the day it says al arba kanfot ksutcha. So even when you put on tzitzit on a five-cornered garment, doesn't mean you put on five tzitzit. You only put on four. By the way, the Shulchan Aruch says if you put on five, you're actually transgressing Bal Tosif. It's actually a prohibition. So you put on four on the four furthest ones. By the way, you should know that the Magen Avraham says that some people actually say 3 and 5 are both patur. So if you have a five-cornered garment, better don't wear the garment at all. He says, don't wear five-cornered garments because you get into a safek if you have to put on tzitzit or not.
I can't picture like a five corners garment.
I know. I guess if it's in the shape of a pentagon. See, in those days, they didn't have clothing that fit to themselves. It was all cloaks. So you made yourself a massive...
like a poncho.
Yeah. How do you call this pentagon in Hebrew?
Mechumash.
So you make yourself a massive piece of material mechumash, and then you wear it, some fancy way, you tie yourself a knot. So that's a five-corner garment. So the Magen Avraham says, don't wear them. Halacha Dalet. Here we're going to see that the halacha is the main material in the clothing decides what the clothing is. Ksut shel beged, uknafea shel or. Let's say you have a cloth garment, but the corners are leather. Chayevet. It's still obligated in tzitzit. He shel or, uknafea shel beged, but if the main body of the clothing is leather, and just the corners are material, p'turah, then it's exempt. She'en holchin ela achar ikar haksut. We only go after the mainstay of the clothing. You have today, they have jackets, and on the back they have leather things. Doesn't make it leather. The main jacket it's a cloth material. It's a fabric. Ksut shel shnei shutafin. If you have clothing that belongs to two people, chayevet, it's still obligated. Shene'emar, as it says in this verse, al kanfei vigdehem. Even if it's their clothing, they have to put on tzitzit. In the other verse it says ksutcha, your clothing, lashon yachid in the singular. Lo ne'emar ksutcha ela lema'et she'ula. The only reason it says it has to be yours is to exclude if you borrow a talis. If you borrow a talis, if you borrow a cloak from somebody else, you don't have to put on tzitzit. If you want to, you could. But you don't have to put on tzitzit for 30 days. Only mikan va'elach chayevet. Only afterwards you're obligated. But that's why it says ksutcha, to exclude borrowed. But vigdehem is the real word to teach you that even partners have to put on tzitzit. Halakha hey. Now we're going to talk about the tzitzit themselves. You put on, here, this is a chart that's going to help us understand the following couple of halachot. Basically, it goes like this. The basic rule is you should try to put on tzitzit of whatever material you have the clothing. The clothing is wool, put on wool tzitzit. Clothing is linen, put on linen tzitzit. Clothing is silk, put on silk tzitzit. That's the basic thing. Now, the thing is that there's a rule called shatnez. Shatnez means you can't mix wool and linen. However, in the Torah says, lo tilbash shatnez, don't wear shatnez, and then right away it says, make yourself tzitzit. Gdilim ta'asalach, that verse we saw before, comes right after shatnez. So the Talmud says, from here we learn that by tzitzit, there's no problem of shatnez. Technically, you could mix wool and linen. So therefore, it's going to come out some problems now. Can I put wool tzitzit on a linen clothing? Can I put linen on a wool clothing? And what we're going to see is like this. Oh, also don't forget, this is a big point, that the tchelet that used to go on the tzitzit, the blue stuff was always wool. So that one string was always wool. So even if you add linen tzitzit, you end up putting at least one string of wool and making shatnez. Right? But by tzitzit, there's no problem of shatnez. So here the Rambam is going to discuss the ideal way to do it, and then he's going to give us some exceptions, as in the third column over here. So let's follow along and we'll see it inside. Halakha hey. Yeah.
Can be considered also if I'm wearing like a linen shirt and like a wool jacket
No.
over.
So that no.
Has to be the same.
Has to be in the same clothing. So by tzitzit, you're tying it on, so it's also considered to be part of it.
Has to be woven or knitted in.
Yes, because the word shatnez means spun. Yeah, shuat. Okay. Halakha hey. Ksut shel tzemer osin lavan shela chutei tzemer. You have a piece of cloth that's wool. You make the white strings wool. Ksut shel pishtan osin lavan shela chutei pishtan. Clothing of linen. You make the white strings also out of linen mimina. So it should be the same type. Ushar begadim, any other materials, osin lavan shel kol min vamin mimino. We make the strings, the white strings of its type, of every type from its type. Kigon, for example, chutei meshi liksut meshi, silk strings for silk clothing, v'chutei notza liksut notza, and strings of goat skin for clothing of goat skin. V'imra salasot lavan. L'chol she'ar minim mitzemer o mipishtim oseh. Technically, if you wanted to make for any other type, tzitzit, out of wool or linen, they're like the kings. You know, wool and linen are the kings, like the master key. They work for everything. Oseh, you can make wool or linen tzitzit. Mipnei she'atzemer va'pishtan potrin bein b'minan, bein shelo b'minan. Because wool and linen exempt a clothing with tzitzit, both in their types and not in their types. Ush'ar minin, other types of tzitzit, other materials, b'minan potrin, shelo b'minan, einan potrin. A silk tzitzit only helps for a silk garment. You can't put silk tzitzit on a wool garment. But you could put wool tzitzit on everything else, because wool is the master key. Okay? So, that's the basic thing. So we saw for wool, you make wool, and for pishtan, for linen, you make the white strings, so far out of linen. Sha'ar minim, you make it out of the same material. Now asks the Rambam, halacha vav, umahu lasot chutei tzemer biksut shel pishtan, or chutei pishtan biksut shel tzemer. What is the law about making wool strings on a linen garment, or linen strings on a wool garment? Afal pishu lavan levado balotcha. We're talking about a case, let's say nowadays, where you only have the white strings, you don't have any blue strings, so you're not making any wool at all anyways, only white. Can you mix the materials? Says the Rambam bidinhu. Logically, the law should be sheyehei mutar. Should be permitted. Shehashatnez mutar li'inyan tzitzit. Because the whole idea of shatnez was permitted when it comes to tzitzit. Sharei hatchelet tzemerhu umatilinot ale pishtan. Because the essence of tzitzit violates shatnez. The blue wool is wool, and you're putting it onto even a linen garment. So therefore, it should be permitted also to make the rest of the strings out of wool. Why says the Rambam, don't we do that? This is a very big principle in halacha. If you don't have to violate a prohibition, you don't. You could make on the linen garment linen tzitzit. You could make on the wool garment wool tzitzit. Any place where you find in halacha a positive commandment and a negative one, if you can fulfill them both, is best. So why would you purposely violate shatnez? V'im lav, if not, then we say, yavo aseh v'yidchet lo taseh. The positive commandment comes and pushes away the negative commandment. V'kan efshar lekayem et shteihem. Over here it's possible to fulfill both. So why would you put on linen clothes and a wool garment if you don't have to? Now, even though in the last halacha the Rambam implied that we put on blue wool onto linen clothing, says the Rambam rabbinically, ksut shel pishtan en mitilin batchelet. Even in the olden times, if you had linen clothing, they wouldn't use the blue. You see, technically you make the white out of linen and you make the blue out of wool. But the Rambam says don't use blue on linen clothing. Don't use blue, not because it's a problem essentially. You only make white strings and you make them out of linen. Not because tzitzit has to be pushed away for shatnez. There's no problem technically, Mishneh Torah. But there's another problem. It's a decree from the rabbis. You may end up, you're sitting in your shirt, your linen shirt, and you have your tzitzit sitting on your wool tzitzit on your linen shirt. And then comes the nighttime, and you're still in your clothes. You don't go to sleep right when sunset. And according to the Rambam, nighttime, eina zman chiyuv tzitzit. Doesn't matter what clothes you're wearing. At nighttime, there's no obligation of tzitzit.
Not obligation, but it's recommended, no?
Oh, we'll see in a second. V'nimtza over al lo taseh be'et she'ein sham mitzvah taseh. And according to the Rambam, you're going to be transgressing a negative commandment at a time when there's no positive commandment. Shechovata tzitzit bayom v'lo balayla. Says the Rambam, the whole obligation of tzitzit is only by day, not by night. Shenemar, as it says, uri temoto, you have to be able to see it. B'shat riyah, at a time when you see things, not by night when you don't see things. By the way, adds the Rambam, just because I said uri temoto, if you're blind, v'suma chayav b'tzitzit. According to everybody, a blind person is obligated in tzitzit. Afal pishe no ro'eh achirim ro'inoto. Even if he doesn't see, others can see. It's a time of seeing by day, but not by night. Look at this chart here. This is a very important machloket between the Rambam and the Rosh. The Rambam says we look at tzitzit only at what time of day it is. I don't care if you're wearing day clothes. I don't care if you're wearing night clothes. According to the Rambam, if you're wearing pajamas in the middle of the day and they have four corners, you have to put on tzitzit. You see, the operative factor is bayom. If you're wearing it by day, whether it's ksut yom, whether it's ksut laila, chayav b'tzitzit. If you're wearing it by night, I don't care what you're wearing. You're wearing a suit and a jacket and walking around, it's nighttime, you're patur from tzitzit. Okay? No problem if you're walking around with it, with tzitzit. No, that's not a problem. But the problem will be if you're wearing shatnez, if you're wearing linen and wool together, and you're walking around by night when it's not a time of tzitzit, then you have a problem. Now, that's according to the Rambam. According to the Rosh, it's the opposite. Daytime or nighttime plays no factor. It depends what kind of clothing it is. Is it a ksut yom or a ksut laila? If it's a clothing that you wear usually by day, I don't care when you're wearing it, day or night, you're obligated in tzitzit. If it's a night clothes that you're wearing, I don't care when you're wearing it, you're patur. And the Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions and doesn't rule, doesn't give a conclusion. That's why we go l'chumra and everything. Harosh Rabbeinu Asher. Me'aposkim hachei chashuvim ba'Ashkenaz. So he represents Ashkenazi halacha, and the Rambam is the father of Sefardi halacha. So this is a very, very important argument. So that's what the Rambam over here says, that chovat tzitzit only by day, not by night. And therefore, according to him, if you're going to end up wearing your linen suit with your wool tzitzit by night, it's going to be a problem. According to the Rosh, there'll be no problem. According to the Rosh, you put on wool tzitzit and linen clothing. I don't care if you walk around by night. It's a day clothing, so it's obligated. But according to Rambam, you have the problem. Says the Rambam halacha chet. By the way, it says uri item oto. So the Magen Avraham writes, that's how we learn that your tzitzit should be visible. People tuck in their tzitzit, it should be visible, because you should be able to see it. It doesn't bring a halacha, but he says it's a nice thing. Halacha chet. Mutar la'adam lilbosh tzitzit balayla. You're allowed to wear tzitzit by night. There's no problem to wear them. Ben b'chol, ben b'shabbat. Weekday, even on Shabbat, when we don't like to carry extra things. Even though it's not the proper time to wear tzitzit by night, it's okay. Ubilvad shalo yivarech. So long as you don't make a blessing. That's why, for example, even nowadays, by slichot, when we put on a talis and it's still the nighttime, you don't make a blessing. Or Yom Kippur, we wear a talis by night. If you put it on before Shkia, you make a blessing. If you come late to shul on the night of Yom Kippur and it's already night, you don't make a blessing when you put on your talis. Oh, so now let's talk about it. I'll tell you what, the talit katan is not mentioned at all in the Talmud. It's hinted at, but it's not mentioned clearly. So talit katan, what we do is like this. Yeah, in the morning we make a blessing, but if you wear it overnight, then you don't make a blessing in the morning. Because if you wear it by night, then it becomes a ksut laila. It's a night clothing, and so you don't make a blessing on night clothing. That's why some people have the custom before they get married in Chabad that we have 2 pairs of tzitzit, 2 pairs of small tzitzit. You change them every morning so you can make a new blessing every day. But once you get married, anyways, since you're wearing a talit gadol, we never make a blessing on talit katan. We just have it in mind when we make the blessing on talit gadol. So it gets included. Right. Even, by the way, even if you're not Chabad, if you wear talit katan and also gadol, then you just make a blessing on the gadol, because that's the main tzitzit. If you're not married yet, you're not wearing, or like, so you wear a talis, so even if you're not married, it doesn't make a difference. But
I don't say a bracha on my tzitzit in the morning.
Huh?
When I put them on in the morning, I don't say a bracha.
If you're wearing the big talis, no.
Put in a big talit.
Yeah.
Oh, the small.
Yeah. If you're going to end up putting on a big talis, you don't.
You put the big one on.
Right.
Let's just say you're going to daven and you don't have your talis around.
Right. Then you say a blessing on a small one. Yeah, absolutely. From when do you make a blessing on tzitzit in the morning? From what time can you make a blessing? Once it's late enough in the morning that you can look at the tzitzit, tell the difference between the blue and the white. Today, the time is defined. We call it mishayakir. That's why sometimes in the winter, when the minyan starts at 6:45 and it's not yet sunrise, you have to actually wait till a certain point to even put on the talit. Forget Shemona Esrei. You have to wait a certain point. You can only put on the tzitzit and tefillin at a certain point. The Ketzad mevarech aleh. What's the blessing on tzitzit? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lihitatef b'tzitzit. God commanded us to wrap ourselves in tzitzit. V'chol zman shemitatef ba bayom mevarech aleh kodem shitatef. People used to wear talis and tefillin all day. So whenever you put on a talis, or even your clothing, every time you put on a piece of clothing that's obligated in tzitzit, you make a new blessing. We don't make a blessing on the tzitzit when we make them, when we spin them, tie them, because the end of the mitzvah is to wrap ourselves. That's why we make the blessing. It's like sukkah. You don't make a blessing on building the sukkah. You make a blessing when you sit in it, because that's the main mitzvah. So to over here, you don't make a blessing when you make it, only when you wear it. The Rambam doesn't discuss what happens if you take off your talit and you're going to put it on very soon afterwards. Like you say, you're going to the bathroom quickly. That's the Shulchan Aruch discusses. If you're taking off your talit and you have in mind to put it back on, and you're going only for ktanim, to urinate, when you come back, you don't make a new blessing. Only if you went to the number 2, to excrement, then you put on tzitzit again, you make a blessing. You're allowed to go in with tzitzit to the bathroom or to the bathhouse. If your tzitzit snapped, white strings, blue strings, zorko ba'ashpa, you can throw it out in the garbage. It's a mitzvah that has no holiness in its body, in its essence. You cannot sell a talis with tzitzis to a Gentile till you untie the tzitzit. Not because there's anything holy essentially about the tzitzit. We're worried he's going to use it to fake himself. He's going to wrap himself in a talit. He's going to go with a Jew, and the Jew's going to think that he's Jewish, and he'll kill him. There was great worry for anti-Semitism in those days.
Today,
Yeah, they fake it, right? You disguise yourself.
They dress like Orthodox Jews and they kidnap people.
Right, exactly. So this is the earlier record of this suspicion. So we don't sell a talis that looks Jewish to a guy. Nashim va'avadim uktanim pturin min hatzitzit min haTorah. Women, slaves, children are exempt from tzitzit by Torah law. Why? Because it's a mitzvah taseh that has a time bound, only by day, not by night. But the rabbis told us, shekol katan sheyodea litatef. Any child that knows how to wrap himself, chayav b'tzitzit, is obligated in tzitzit, k'dei lechancho b'mitzvot, to educate him in mitzvahs. The Rambam uses language that he is chayav, not his father. Chinuch has even an element where the kid becomes mechuyav, he becomes obligated. Why? Because when it comes to chinuch, the child is there not only as a tool for the father to do his mitzvah, but the mitzvah of chinuch, the whole idea of education is that the child should do the mitzvah. So when the child does the mitzvah, he becomes an essential element of the fulfillment of chinuch, and therefore he becomes, according to many poskim, he becomes mechuyav b'davar. He becomes obligated in a certain way because he's helping to fulfill the mitzvah of chinuch by virtue of the fact that he does the mitzvah. V'nashim v'avadim sheratzu lehitatef b'tzitzit. If you have women or slaves who wanted to wear tzitzit, mitatfim b'lo beracha, they can wear tzitzit with no blessing. V'chen shar mitzvot aseh, shar nashim p'turot meha, and any other commandment where women are exempt from them, im ratzu la'asot otan b'lo beracha, en memachin bi'adan. If they wanted to fulfill it with no blessing, we're not going to protest against them. Tumtum v'androginos, a person whose genitalia is blocked, you don't know if he's male or female, or androgynous, he has both genitalia. Chayavin b'kulan misafek, they're obligated in all mitzvahs out of doubt. Lefichach en mevarchin, ela osin b'lo beracha. They do like women. They don't make a blessing, just without they do the mitzvah without a blessing. Halacha Yud. Heach chiyuv mitzvat tzitzit. What is the obligation exactly of tzitzit? I said before in the class. There's no obligation to put on tzitzit on clothing. They consider in your drawer. You don't have to wear tzitzit. If you want to wear clothing, there's tzitzit. Kol adam shechayav la'asot mitzvah zu. Any person who is obligated to do this mitzvah, imit kaseh biksuta ra'oi letzitzit. If he's choosing to wear clothing which is fitting for tzitzit, yatil la tzitzit v'achar kach yitkaseh ba. You first put on the tzitzit, then you cover yourself with them. If you went ahead and covered yourself, dressed yourself with no tzitzit, you have cancelled, you have not fulfilled a positive commandment. But if you have clothing which is fitting for tzitzit, so long as no person is wearing them, they're folded and put away in a drawer, they're exempt from tzitzis. It's not an obligation on the garment, it's an obligation on the person who has the garment. Says the Rambam, Halacha Yud Aleph, nevertheless, afal pi she'ein adam mechuyav liknot lo talit ulitatev ba, kedei sheyaseh ba tzitzit. Even though a person is not obligated to buy a talis and to wear it so that he can be obligated and make tzitzit, ein ra'ui la'adam chasid sheyiftor atzmo mi mitzvah zu. It's not right for a person who's pious to exempt himself purposely from this mitzvah. Ela le'olam yishtadel. A person should always put an effort, liot atuf, biksut, hamechuyevet b'tzitzit, to always wear some kind of clothing that's obligated in tzitzit, kedei sheyekayem mitzvah zu, so he should fulfill the mitzvah. Ub'shat hatfilah, tzarich lezaher biyoter. You should be especially careful during davening. Gnai gadolhu, talmidei chachamim. It's very big embarrassment for sages. Sheitpalalu v'hem einam atufim meshadavu without a talis. Now, why actually? Why actually is not an obligation? You would think it's so important. It should be an obligation. So the Rebbe once said that it's because you can't command somebody to remember all of Hashem's mitzvot. The purpose of tzitzit is to remember Hashem's mitzvot. That kind of hitorerut has to come from you. You have to want to remember Hashem's mitzvot. And so then once you want to, then you put on tzitzit. במנחה? בתפילה אתה אומר. Yeah. לא, אנחנו לא שמים בידיעה.
בתפילה צריך להיזהר ביותר, הוא אומר.
Yeah. It's a morning prayer. I actually don't know.
יש בתי כנסת
שהחזן עולה, כן.
הוא חסר את עצמו עם פרט כבוד.
Oh, אני רואה כאן, you're right. I'll tell you what, the commentaries say that according to the Rambam, even memncha. Yeah, you're right. Halacha Yud Bet. Once a person already has a talis and he's already wearing the tzitzit, le'olam yehei adam zahir b'mitzvat tzitzit. He should even be more careful in doing the mitzvah of tzitzit. Shaharei katuv shkala v'tala b'kol mitzvot kulan, because the Torah compared it and depended upon it, all the mitzvahs completely. Shenemar, as it says, uritem oto, when you see the tzitzit, uzchartem et kol mitzvot Hashem, you will remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. Brich Rachmanades Ayan, blessed is the merciful one who give us assistance. Mazal tov for finishing Hilchot tzitzit. Tomorrow we begin Hilchot Brachot.